So on this video podcast, we're going to talk about some of the obstacles faced in the legislative process. Now, these are my compilation. As one might contemplate, there are a number of different obstacles to overcome during the legislative process in California. I characterize them as policy, fiscal, and political obstacles that may have to be addressed as a bill travels through the California legislative process. Now, in preparation for the introduction of a bill, you might pose a few questions before pitching your bill. And I begin first with potential legislator concerns before I hit the three potential obstacle areas. So with legislator concerns, when presenting a bill proposal to a legislator as potentially authoring your bill, I think generally legislators and their staff care about some of the following issues. Obviously, what the bill does policy-wise and what are the main arguments for and against the bill? What's the fiscal impact, if anything? Who are likely supporters of the bill? And of course, who are likely opponents of the bill? How might the bill impact their legislative district? How would the administration, particularly the governor's office, view the bill? And what are potential policy or political implications of carrying the bill? Now, assuming the legislator agrees to author your bill, the sponsor or the principal supporter or supporters of the legislation is going to need to prepare to address some of the potential obstacles that the bill will likely encounter. Again, these are some of the obstacles that I identify, and I go through them by posing questions to hopefully help guide your resolution of them. So policy obstacles is the first group, and naturally there should be a solid policy rationale for the legislation. Unfortunately, the legislature often generally examines a proposed solution rather than first examining the policy problem that you're attempting to address and then determining what is the best possible solution to that problem. So at the early point, I think the proponents of a bill need to think about, in presenting the bill with the solution to the stated public policy problem, has the policy problem been clearly explained? Is this bill, in fact, the best solution to addressing the stated policy problem? Or are there other more viable solutions to address this problem? If so, why have one or more of those other solutions been discarded for pursuit of this one? What are potential policy problems or arguments against the other solutions that were considered? Fundamentally, is there a sufficient policy justification or rationale to make your proposed changes to the law? And what is the evidence that the alleged policy shortcoming is with existing law? Next, I turn to some of the fiscal obstacles, and assuming that one or more of the policy implications are addressed, the fiscal impact will undoubtedly be considered by the respective appropriations committees, which are the fiscal committees in the California legislature. Now, note that even some policy committees such as health, education, certainly the Revenue and Taxation Committee in the Assembly, or the Governance and Finance Committee in the State Senate, often consider the fiscal impact of proposed legislation. In fact, the Assembly Revenue and Taxation has kind of its own variation of a suspense file to hold up bills that have a fiscal impact until a later date, and then releasing some but not all of those measures. The fiscal considerations definitely come into play if your bill meets the financial threshold to be placed on the suspense file of either the Assembly or Senate Appropriations Committees, particularly in time when the state is facing potential financial shortfalls or difficulties. And of course, the view of the governor and on the fiscal impact of legislation becomes crucial, particularly in the second house, when the Appropriations Committee in the second house is considering the bill. So what are some potential questions to pose concerning fiscal obstacles? Well, obviously, to start with, is there a fiscal impact due to your proposed law change? If so, how significant is that impact? If there is a fiscal impact, is it to the state government, to local government, and or to the private sector? If the fiscal impact is significant, is there a funding mechanism or some other source of potential revenues to pay for the cost of this bill proposal? And ultimately, will the Department of Finance support or oppose or be neutral on the proposal due to that fiscal impact? Opposition during the process most likely leads to a veto request if the bill hits the governor's desk without addressing the DOF's concerns. And then, the last major area that I identify again are some political obstacles. Certainly you got to take into consideration whether there are any certain entrenched special interests that sometimes they pose very difficult hurdles to overcome in the legislative process. Even times when the author and the sponsor might have resolved the policy and fiscal concerns of the bill. And that's because those who are in a powerful enough position may not want to do anything in a particular subject area because it may not benefit their interests or it may weaken their position. So some of the political questions to pose is obviously which group or groups are likely to support your bill and how are they impacted by the proposed law change? And of course, on the other side of the coin is what group or groups are likely to oppose the bill and how are they impacted by the proposed law change? Fundamentally, does your proposed bill result in effectively hurting one group and or helping a different group? What sort of grassroots support is there for either side of this proposal? How significant would the stated support or opposition for the bill actually be? How might the Capitol Press Corps or the local media in the legislator's district perhaps portray this legislative proposal? Some other factors, does the majority party in the Assembly or Senate support or oppose the proposal? How do some of the key legislative staff view it? And of course, what's the administration's view of the proposed law change? Does the bill proposal impact one or more state agencies? And if so, does that agency support or oppose this legislation? And then you have to begin thinking about, are there possible amendments to the bill to alleviate some of the policy, fiscal, or political concerns? There are naturally some other obstacles. For example, the vote requirement may be an obstacle. If, for example, your bill requires a supermajority vote for passage, does it have an urgency clause? Is it a tax increase? These types of bills require a 2/3 majority vote for passage on the floors of the legislature. There are even some higher vote thresholds sometimes where you're amending a particular initiative statute, such as Prop 99 and the tobacco tax and its 4/5 majority vote requirement. So as you can probably expect, each controversial bill in the California legislative process may create its own unique set of obstacles that'll have to be addressed. So there really isn't a clear set of rules that apply across the board in some cookie cutter approach to addressing all pieces of legislation. It's a rare year in the legislative process, in my mind, that doesn't result in me learning a new tactic or some method to improve a bill's chances of success, perhaps the following year if we're unsuccessful that year.